What if the most powerful name in modern royal history wasn't decided in a boardroom, a tradition-bound palace corridor, or even by the king himself, but in a quiet moment between a husband and wife who both understood that one single choice could shake the entire monarchy? Imagine waking up one morning to discover that William and Kate, the future king and queen, have done something the royal family silently prayed they would never dare to do. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. They resurrected the name. The one name that carries weight heavier than a crown. The one name that still echoes through palace walls even after decades. The one name that divides, unites, inspires, haunts, and demands attention. Diana. And not only that, they paired it with another legacy name. Another symbol of royal power. Another ghost whose presence still lingers in photos, ceremonies, memories, and the hearts of millions. Elizabeth. Diana, Elizabeth. Two names that individually shaped the world. Combined, they form a statement so bold, so emotionally loaded, so politically charged, that palace insiders reportedly didn't know whether to applaud or panic. But why now? Why this baby? Why this moment in royal history? That is the mystery the world cannot stop talking about. And the mystery we are about to unravel. Because make no mistake, royal names are never just names. They are chess moves, signals, warnings, tributes, declarations of loyalty, and sometimes defiance. And this may be the most explosive name announcement the modern monarchy has ever seen. Let's rewind. Picture this, a crisp morning in London. The press has gathered outside Kensington Palace. No one knows why. Some assume it's a routine appearance. Others suspect a charity event. A few whisper about a possible family update. But then the mood changes. A senior aide steps out, holding a folder, one that looks too formal, too deliberate, too carefully chosen for a casual announcement. And in that moment, every journalist realizes this is not routine. This is seismic. Before the cameras even start rolling, before William and Kate appear, before a single word is spoken, the crowd feels it. That electricity that only bursts through the air when royal history is about to be rewritten. And then, without warning, a simple sentence leaks from someone close to the family. The name pays tribute to two women William never truly got to say goodbye to. A sentence like that? It spreads online like wildfire. Because everyone knows who those women are. One was his mother. The other was his grandmother. Two titans of royal memory. Two pillars of his emotional universe. Two forces that shaped him more than any living royal ever could. But here's the twist. The name wasn't just chosen for emotional reasons. There were political reasons, historical reasons, personal reasons, and even reasons William himself admitted he struggled to accept at first. That's when the real story begins. Not with the announcement, not with the reactions, but weeks before, when something strange started happening inside the palace. An unusual number of closed-door meetings. Senior staff being shuffled. Schedules quietly adjusted. Aides refusing to comment. Camilla's office requesting clarifications. Princess and making an unannounced visit. And King Charles suddenly postponing two private engagements for family discussions. To the outside world, these were isolated events. But for insiders, they were signs. Signs that something major was brewing. And then, the most curious thing of all, William was spotted visiting a place he almost never goes. A place connected directly to Diana. No photos leaked at first. No details surfaced. Just one rumor. He was alone, and he stayed longer than expected. People close to him said he walked slower that day, spoke less, looked somewhere between reflective and burdened. But what was he thinking about? Who was he thinking about? And what decision was weighing on him so heavily? To understand that, you have to understand the emotional battlefield William has always carried inside him. He is the son of a beloved woman whose memory the world refuses to let fade, and the son of a father who has spent decades balancing admiration, regret, responsibility, and guilt in the wake of her loss. He is the heir to both of them, and that conflict lives in his shadow every day. So when it came time to choose the name of his fourth child, William knew there was no choice more symbolic, no decision more scrutinized, no gesture more loaded with meaning. But even then, no one, not even staff who've worked with him for years, expected him to choose the one name that had been quietly considered too sacred, too fragile, too explosive, and, in some eyes, too dangerous to revive. Or so they thought, because someone else in the family didn't see it as dangerous. Someone didn't see it as provocative. Someone didn't see it as reopening old wounds. Kate, who never met Diana, yet carries the expectation of honoring her in everything she does. Kate, who witnessed firsthand how Diana's ghost still influences William's life. Kate, who saw public hope in their marriage as a healing continuation of what Diana stood for. And Kate, who reportedly told William one night after the children went to bed, "If we don't honor her now, then when?" That sentence changed everything. Insiders say William sat quietly for a long moment after she said it. Not defensive, not dismissive, not conflicted. Just quiet, as if replaying decades of memories in his head. Diana at the school gates. Diana on the beach. Diana laughing in videos. Diana shielding him from cameras. Diana whispering to him during events. Diana hugging him when he cried. Diana telling him he could be greater than the crown he was destined to wear. But choosing that name, it meant stepping into a firestorm. Because the palace hasn't fully agreed on Diana's legacy, not publicly and not privately. Some want her remembered with controlled reverence. Some want her memory softened. Some want her chapter closed. Some fear her influence still threatens the monarchy's image. And some, a very small but powerful circle, have always believed invoking her name again at the highest level could fracture the careful balance the crown has been trying to rebuild for years. William knew all that. He knew the risks. He knew the sensitivities. He knew the pain. He knew the politics. But he also knew something else. The monarchy is changing, whether the senior royals want it to or not. People aren't drawn to tradition alone anymore. They're drawn to authenticity, to emotion, to transparency, to honesty, to real human connection. And Diana embodied all of that. So when the moment came to finalize the name of this new child, his final child, some say, William made a decision that would send shockwaves through the entire royal family. He wasn't just naming his daughter after Diana. He was reclaiming Diana's legacy. He was anchoring it into the future of the crown, not as a footnote, not as an echo, not as a tragic memory, but as a living presence inside the next generation of the monarchy. But that wasn't the only tribute, because the middle name, Elizabeth, was just as powerful. A dual legacy, a merging of two worlds, a bridge between past and future. A symbolic fusion of the monarchy's brightest light and its most complicated shadow. Diana, Elizabeth. Diana, the rebel heart. Elizabeth, the unshakable throne. One name rooted in emotion, one rooted in duty. Together, they form a message that only William and Kate truly understood. A message about healing. A message about balance. A message about unity in a family that has been drifting apart. A message about honoring both sides of the legacy that raised William into the man and future king he has become. But there's something the public didn't see. Something hidden behind closed doors. Before the world celebrated the name. Before social media exploded. Before newspapers printed headlines in bold letters. Before royal observers began dissecting every possible meaning. There was one final conversation. One final moment. One final push that changed William's mind forever. And it had nothing to do with the monarchy. No protocol. No staff opinion. No historical precedent. No political calculation. It was something far more personal. Something that touched a wound William has carried since he was 15. Something that made him sit down, close his eyes, and say quietly, "It's time." But what happened in that moment? What did he hear? What did he see? What memory resurfaced so powerfully that it erased every hesitation he had left? Because once that moment happened, everything was set in motion. The announcement, the shockwaves, the reactions, the backlash, the celebration, the confusion, the silence from some royals, the near tears from others. And that one private moment, is what we will uncover chapter by chapter. But first, you need to know something even more shocking. The announcement almost didn't happen that day. Someone tried to delay it. Someone tried to intervene. Someone believed the name was too provocative and that William and Kate should reconsider the consequences. Who was it? What did they say? And why did their involvement escalate tensions inside the palace? Because that moment, that attempted intervention, set off a chain reaction that would split the royal family into two silent camps. And what came next would change everything. For William, for Kate, for the monarchy, and for the world watching. But that's the story of Chapter 1. It started with a whisper. Not a press leak. Not a public slip. Not even a planned hint. Just a whisper. Soft, unassuming, but powerful enough to ripple through an entire palace like a sudden gust of cold air. A palace staff member, someone who had worked quietly behind the scenes for years, heard Kate speaking in the hallway outside a private study. Not loudly, not dramatically, just softly, intimately, as if she was rehearsing a sentence she had never spoken before. She deserves a name that carries her story. The staffer froze, because they knew exactly who Kate was referring to. Kate wasn't talking about herself, or about Elizabeth II, or about a noble ancestor buried deep in centuries of royal lineage. She was talking about Diana. But why rehearse such a statement? Why practice it as if preparing for a moment that would define the future? The staffer didn't dare ask. Not openly, not even quietly. But the whisper spread anyway, how palace whispers always do. It slithered through corridors. It fluttered between staff offices. It echoed in the kitchens. It reached private dining rooms. And soon, it grew into one of the most intense waves of speculation the palace had ever experienced, all before a single announcement was made. But that whisper wasn't the beginning. Because what the world didn't know, what even most staff didn't know, was that the tension surrounding the baby name had been building long before that quiet moment outside the study. The first sign arrived weeks earlier. Early one morning, William had abruptly requested that his schedule for the day be cleared. No prior notice. No explanation. No alternate events. Just a simple, direct message to his aide. I need time alone today. For a future king who plans his days down to the minute. That was unprecedented. And where he went next only deepened the mystery. He didn't go to Kensington Palace's gardens. He didn't go to a royal meeting room. He didn't even go to his private office. He went somewhere no one expected, a place he avoids unless absolutely necessary. A location tied to memories that never stop aching. He went to Diana's resting place. No entourage, no press, not even Kate accompanied him. Just William. Alone, walking a path he has walked before, but each step carried the weight of decades. Witnesses say he paused by the water for a long time, staring out at the quiet stillness that surrounded the island where his mother lies. At one point, he reportedly sat down, elbows on his knees, eyes lowered, not in grief, but in contemplation, as if he came seeking an answer. But what question was he asking? What decision was he trying to make at Diana's side? Because only hours after that visit, palace routines shifted in subtle but unmistakable ways. Schedules changed, meetings were rearranged, advisors were quietly briefed, and senior royals were suddenly checking in far more often than usual. Something was moving behind the scenes, and no one outside the inner circle could understand why. But then came the second sign. Late one night, long after the palace had gone quiet, a staff member delivering documents to the whale's private sitting room overheard an unusual conversation. Kate's voice, soft, measured, but unmistakably emotional. It has to be the right choice, William. Not just for her, for us, for the children, for the future. The staff member stepped back quickly, not wanting to intrude, but the moment stuck with them. Because Kate didn't speak this way often, at least not where others could hear. Her tone held not just concern, but certainty. And William's answer? Barely audible, barely more than a breath. I know. I'm just not sure how they'll react. They, not the public, not the media, the family. And that was the clue that something deeper, far deeper, was happening behind those closed doors. Because anytime someone in the royal family fears how they'll react, it means one thing. Conflict is coming. But what kind? Conflict of tradition? Conflict of emotion? Conflict of legacy? All of the above. Because the name Diana Elizabeth was never just a baby name. It was a declaration, a battle cry whispered through generations, a message sent directly into the heart of the royal family, one that some would embrace with love and others would interpret as a challenge. And William knew it. He knew naming his child after Diana wasn't a simple tribute. It was reopening a chapter still lined with scars. Scars some royals desperately want to forget. Scars others never healed from. But Kate saw it differently. To her, it wasn't reopening a wound. It was closing one, honoring a woman her husband adored. honoring a mother-in-law she never met but feels connected to through stories, photographs, and the quiet ache William sometimes tries, unsuccessfully, to hide. This fourth baby was their chance, she believed, to make a statement the monarchy had avoided for decades. A statement of unity between Diana's legacy and the crown's future. But that belief wasn't shared by everyone. And that leads us to the moment everything nearly fell apart. A week before the announcement, Kensington Palace changed literally overnight. Doors that were usually open remained shut. Conversations stopped when certain people walked by. Phones buzzed more. Senior aides whispered more. And staff were told, indirectly, to expect heightened sensitivity from the family. That's polite royal language for tension is climbing. Brace yourselves. Then came the moment that sparked internal panic. In a small, private office, one of William's close advisors was reviewing protocols when they stumbled upon something unexpected. A document drafted months earlier, long before the public suspected anything about a fourth baby. A document outlining potential names. Charlotte was still a toddler then. George was growing fast. Louis had just begun talking. But even that early, William and Kate had created a short list for a future child. 3 names were on that list. 2 were traditional, safe, predictable. But the third? Diana. It wasn't highlighted. It wasn't circled. It wasn't marked. But it was there. The advisor froze. Because if that name had been written down long before this baby was conceived, it meant this wasn't a sudden emotional tribute. It was planned, intentional, deliberate. And that realization sent the advisor straight to the king's office. At least, that's what palace whispers claim. And from that moment, the delicate balance between anticipation and anxiety began to tilt. Fast forward to the morning Kate whispered the line. She deserves a name that carries her story. Unbeknownst to her, 2 senior royals had already been informed of the potential name. And they were not happy. One allegedly feared the public backlash. One feared comparisons to Diana would overshadow the child's life. One feared the media storm. One feared the political message. But one reaction was far more personal. A sense of dread that old wounds would be reopened, old narratives re-examined, old mistakes unearthed, and old rivalries reignited. All because William dared to honor the woman who shaped him more than any advisor or monarch ever could. But William didn't budge. He listened. He nodded. He absorbed the concerns. But his decision remained unchanged. There was only one thing that shook him, one thing that made him pause. And it all stemmed from something he and Kate overheard while walking through the palace one evening. It wasn't a staff member. It wasn't a senior royal. It wasn't even an advisor. It was Charlotte. Charlotte, who had no idea she was being overheard, was talking to George and Louis in the playroom. She said quietly, "I wish she could have met Grandma Diana. I think she would have liked us." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was just a child's innocent truth. But that single sentence hit William like a wave. Because in a child's voice, he heard everything he had struggled to put into words. Diana's absence, Diana's presence, Diana's memory, Diana's love, all of it, living on in a generation that never met her. And that's when he knew. The name wasn't just a tribute to the past. It was a gift to the future. A way to keep Diana's legacy alive not as a symbol of tragedy, but as a light guiding his children. Still, even knowing that, the road to announcing the name would not be simple. In fact, as the day approached, tensions escalated dramatically. More calls from senior royals. More urgent discussions. More attempts to persuade William and Kate to consider alternatives. Names that were safe. Names that were expected. Names that wouldn't risk igniting old rivalries. But William and Kate held firm. And that resistance, that quiet but unshakable determination, triggered the moment that nearly changed everything. Someone tried to stop the announcement. A senior royal. A person with influence. A person whose voice still carries weight. They confronted William behind closed doors, insisting he reconsider. The exact words haven't leaked. But the tone? Firm. Tense. Borderline desperate. What happened in that room remains the most closely guarded secret of this entire story. But the aftermath? That's where Chapter 2 begins. Because after that confrontation, William walked out of the room with a face described by one aide as steel. He had made his choice. He had made his stand. He was going to honor his mother and his grandmother, no matter who disagreed. But the consequences of that decision, they were only just beginning. And what happened next? No one in the palace, not even William, saw coming. It's easy to think a fourth baby wouldn't matter much in a royal family already overflowing with heirs, history, and headlines. But that assumption is exactly why so many people miss the real explosion that was silently ticking beneath the surface. Because this wasn't just another baby. This wasn't just a sweet family expansion. This wasn't even just a personal joy for William and Kate. This fourth baby changed the monarchy. Not symbolically, not subtly, not metaphorically, but structurally, in ways that royal watchers, historians, insiders, and even the royal family themselves were unprepared to confront. And it all started with a single question that the world didn't ask, but William quietly agonized over. What story will this child inherit? Because every royal child inherits more than a title. They inherit a history, a narrative, a burden, a spotlight, a role in the most complicated family dynasty on earth. But this child, the fourth child, inherited something different, a chance to reshape a legacy. So let's peel back the layers. First, the most obvious shift, succession. In most families, the birth of a fourth child might shift dynamics, but it doesn't usually tilt the balance of power. But in the royal family, every baby is a moving piece in a centuries-old game of strategy. Yes, Princess Charlotte keeps her place as she is older. Yes, Prince Louis keeps his too. But the arrival of another royal baby, especially one born into the direct line of succession, sends the press, politicians, advisors, and even foreign governments scrambling to reassess future possibilities. Because each child can potentially influence who becomes monarch, who gets key royal duties, who represents the crown abroad, who becomes the popular royal, and who becomes the spare in ways that echo painfully through history. But here's where it gets interesting. This baby, from the moment of conception, was never meant to be a spare. Not emotionally, not symbolically. This child was meant to be something else entirely, a bridge, a healing thread, a unifying symbol in a royal era defined by division, controversy, and fracture. And palace insiders say William knew that long before the announcement. But that wasn't the only reason this fourth baby mattered. Another reason ran deeper. And it startled the royal staff when they realized it. Because every royal child shapes the monarchy's future optics. George is the future king, the anchor of stability. Charlotte is the trailblazer, a poised, fearless force with the potential to modernize the royal image. Louis is the charismatic wild card, the one whose charm the public already adores. But the fourth child? The fourth child changes the shape of the family. Not 3 kids. 4. Not a symbolic trio. But a powerful middle-heavy dynamic. 4 is not subtle. 4 is not strategic. 4 suggests something William and Kate rarely say, but deeply believe. Family first. Even over optics. Even over tradition. Even over royal expectations. And that alone disrupts royal norms. Because traditionally, the heir has the perfect family unit. 1 heir. 2 spares. Done. But William and Kate rejected that. They expanded not because of protocol, but because of emotion. And this emotional decision triggered the most unexpected shift of all, the public's hope. For years, the monarchy has struggled with its image. Scandals, divisions, public criticism, the Sussex fallout, the Andrew disaster, a generational identity crisis. People were losing faith, but the news of a fourth baby sparked something the palace didn't anticipate. Warmth, excitement, joy, unity. For the first time in years, headlines shifted from fracture to family, and the palace took note. Because this baby, just by existing, became a narrative reset button. But that wasn't the real twist. The real shock came when the Royal Succession Board updated quietly, with no announcement, no press briefing, and no explanation. It happened at 2:17 a.m. Someone noticed. Then another. Then screenshots started circulating. Then journalists compared archived versions. Suddenly, whispers grew. Why update now? Why so quietly? Why this specific timing? Because the board didn't just add the baby to be. It rearranged secondary lines. It adjusted titles. It closed old loopholes. It tightened the monarchy's structure behind the scenes. This was not coincidence. It was preparation. Something big was coming, and the palace had already begun adjusting pieces on the chessboard. But here's where the story truly sharpens, the part insiders talk about in careful, coded language. The monarchy is restructuring. Not publicly, not with announcements, but slowly, quietly, deliberately. And this child is part of that plan. Why? Because William is the future king, but more importantly, he is the architect of the monarchy's next chapter. And he sees this fourth baby as a clean slate. Someone who will grow up away from the pressures George faces. Someone who will understand duty, but not be crushed by it. Someone who will carry Diana's heart and Elizabeth's legacy in a new way. Someone who may become the emotional center of the next generation. But here's the question. Why did this baby matter more than the others? Because William and Kate have changed. They're no longer the young couple learning the ropes. They're no longer adjusting to public roles. They're no longer the safe royals. They are the heartbeat of the monarchy now. Their decisions matter more. Their voice carries more weight. Their symbolism resonates louder. This fourth baby was their first major decision as the monarchy's true future leaders, not followers. And they weren't going to choose lightly. But the ripple effect didn't stop at symbolism or structure. There was a deeper, more vulnerable reason this child was significant. And it had nothing to do with the monarchy. It had everything to do with William's childhood. Because for decades, he lived with a void, the absence of the one woman who shaped him. And the longer he lived, the more he realized something. He wanted one more chance to honor her. Not through charity. Not through public tributes. Not through speeches or memorials. But through something pure. Something personal. Something only a father could give. A name. But William wasn't the only one whose emotions were at play. Kate had her own reasons. Reasons that staff say were far more intense than people realize. 3 years ago, before this fourth baby was even a possibility, Kate reportedly had a quiet conversation with her mother, Carol. A conversation so emotional that Carol later told a friend she hadn't seen Kate like that in years. Kate said she felt something missing, something unresolved, something unspoken between her and the woman she never met, Diana. Kate reportedly said, "I'm raising her grandchildren. I wish she could see them. I wish she could see him," meaning William. Kate sees the weight he carries, the grief that never disappears, the pressure he hides, the memories he rarely shares. She sees it all. And deep down, she wanted to give something back, not to the monarchy, but to him. A gift, a healing, a way to connect him spiritually to the mother he lost. That's why this fourth baby mattered to her. It wasn't politics. It wasn't optics. It wasn't royal strategy. It was love. Pure, simple, human. But love is rarely simple in the royal family. And when palace insiders began whispering that William and Kate were leaning toward honoring Diana, again, some members of the family reacted with thinly veiled discomfort. Not outright opposition, not open criticism, but something more subtle. A tightening of expressions, a shift in posture, a slightly colder tone, a quiet, carefully worded reminder about balancing tributes. But balancing tributes was the whole point. Because this fourth baby wasn't just named after Diana. Elizabeth's name was woven in too, deliberately. Diana and Elizabeth, two women who defined William's emotional universe. One shaped his heart, the other shaped his destiny. Combining their names wasn't favoritism. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't political. It was symmetry, a merging of the two worlds that William had spent his entire life trying to reconcile. But even with all of that emotion swirling beneath the surface, the palace was not prepared for what came next. Because 1 week before the announcement, something happened that changed the temperature inside the monarchy instantly. A photo leaked. Not a scandalous one, not a dramatic one, but a deeply revealing one. It showed William standing alone, not in a palace, not in a meeting, not in a royal setting. It showed him at Diana's resting place, his head lowered, his posture contemplative, his expression unreadable. Someone snapped it quietly from a distance, and though it wasn't intended to go public, leaks have a way of slipping through cracks during times of tension. When the image surfaced, it exploded across social media. It didn't need a caption. It didn't need explanation. Everyone felt it. Everyone knew. Everyone recognized that posture. A son speaking silently to the mother he lost too soon. The world began whispering. Is he naming the baby after her? Was he asking her blessing? Is he revisiting old wounds? Is this a sign? The palace went into overdrive trying to manage the coverage. But it was too late. The narrative had already formed, and it terrified certain members of the royal family. They feared the emotional wave. They feared the media frenzy. They feared Diana's memory rising once again to overshadow the present monarchy. Because whenever Diana enters the spotlight, even symbolically, the monarchy feels her power. And this time, her name wasn't just entering the spotlight. It was entering the bloodline. That's why this fourth baby mattered. This baby wasn't just a new royal. This baby was a turning point, a symbol, a bridge, a rebirth, a shift in public emotion, a reawakening of Diana's legacy, a merging of the monarchy's most powerful female names. And the royal family knew it. That's why tensions escalated. That's why meetings grew heated. That's why concerns were raised. That's why some tried, carefully, discreetly, to stop the name from being finalized. But they were already too late. Because once the photo leaked, once the whispers spread, once the narrative took hold, William and Kate made their final decision. And nothing, not tradition, not pressure, not protocol, was going to stop them. The announcement was set. The world was waiting. But one more shock was coming. A shock that would reveal not everyone in the family was on the same page. A shock that would trigger the most emotional moment of the entire pregnancy. A shock that would expose true feelings. And it began with a voice no one expected. A voice from within the palace staff. A voice that described what happened as. The moment the family realized the name was unstoppable. What did that staff member mean? And what exactly happened? That is the beginning of Chapter 3. It began with a click. A single, quiet, almost accidental click. The kind of sound no one notices in a world where cameras rule every corner. But this click wasn't from a paparazzi ambush. It wasn't from a tabloid drone. It wasn't from someone hoping to cash in on royal chaos. It came from someone who didn't intend to capture what they captured. Someone who didn't plan to take a photo at all. Someone who later said, with shaking hands, "I wasn't aiming at him. He just stepped into the frame." But the moment William stepped into that frame, the course of the announcement, and the emotional storm surrounding it, shifted permanently. Because the image, taken from across a lake, showed something the world rarely sees. William, alone, vulnerable, unprotected by royal posture or duty. Just a man, a son, standing at the edge of the water surrounding his mother's resting place. His head bowed, his shoulders heavy, his expression soft and distant, not broken, not grieving, but remembering. It was the kind of image that reminds the world that even heirs carry scars, and it was never meant to be seen. But before we get to how the photo leaked, before we unravel the chain reaction it triggered, we need to step into the moment before the click. Because the Rayal story begins in the silence that surrounded William that day. He didn't come with an entourage. He didn't bring security in full detail. He didn't come for a ceremony, a speech, or a public tribute. He came alone, without announcement, without protection from the cameras he dreaded. The staff at Althorpe say he walked the narrow path with the same slow, deliberate steps he had taken there as a teenager. The steps of a boy clutching his brother's hand at their mother's funeral. And even now, decades later, those steps still carried the echoes of that day. Witnesses said he stood at the water's edge for a long time, longer than usual, long enough to suggest he wasn't there out of duty, but out of need. One staff member, who has seen William visit before, described the moment like this. He had the look of someone carrying a decision in his pocket. A decision, a secret, a weight. And as he stared across the water toward the island that protected Diana's memory, he seemed to be searching for something: clarity, courage, permission, or perhaps forgiveness. Because choosing to name his daughter after Diana wasn't simply about honoring a legacy. It was about confronting one. A legacy that the royal family still doesn't fully agree on. A legacy that shaped his childhood. A legacy that defined his adulthood. A legacy that the world refuses to let fade. No matter how hard the monarchy tries to redraw its future, William came that day seeking something the crown could never give him: a mother's blessing. He never said those words publicly. He never admitted it to staff. He never phrased it that way. But anyone who saw his face in that moment, the stillness, the softness, the tension, understood. This was a son asking a question. And then, as he stood there, eyes locked on the white memorial lilies floating on the water, the photographer, a young nature hobbyist, unknowingly lifted her camera. She thought she was photographing the reflection of trees, the light on the water, the colors of the morning. But then William stepped into the shot. She lowered her camera instantly. She didn't want to intrude. She wasn't chasing money. She wasn't chasing a headline. But the photo had already been taken, saved with the others, buried among shots of branches, ripples, shadows, and swans. She said nothing. She told no one. She simply went home, downloaded her pictures, and closed the folder. But fate has a twisted sense of timing. Because the next day, the palace began swirling with tension. Meetings were called. Calls were made. Advisors were pulled aside. Senior royals raised concerns. The closer William and Kate got to the final announcement, the more pressure built. And in the middle of that internal storm, the photo found its way to the wrong place. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but through a simple accident that would have been harmless any other week. The young photographer joined an online photography forum, a small, quiet community of hobbyists who post nature shots for advice and feedback. She uploaded 10 images. 9 were of trees, water, and wildlife. The 10th was the picture she didn't even realize she had included, the one she assumed was just a silhouette of a man standing by the lake. But it wasn't just any silhouette. It was a future king, in one of the most emotionally vulnerable positions he had ever been photographed. The image sat harmlessly for 13 minutes. Then someone commented, "That looks like Prince William." Within seconds, the forum erupted into a frenzy. Some insisted it wasn't him. Some insisted it was. Some begged her to remove it. Some encouraged her to send it to the press. By the time she deleted the upload, 14 minutes after posting, it was too late. 10 screenshots had already been taken. 2 were already uploaded to Twitter. 1 was already making its way to a mid-tier British gossip blog. And 30 minutes later, it exploded. The image circulated across social media faster than the palace could respond. Thousands shared it. Millions saw it. Not because it was scandalous, but because it was human. A son visiting the one person whose absence still sits like a shadow over his entire life. Hashtags erupted instantly. Hashtag William and Diana. Hashtag Future King Human. Hashtag Legacy and Love. Hashtag Diana Elizabeth. People wrote paragraphs under the image. Some admired him. Some mourned his loss. Some reflected on Diana's legacy. Some speculated about the baby name. But a small group, royal scholars, historians, longtime royal watchers, immediately noticed something deeper. In the photo, William wasn't just standing. He was holding something. Something small. Something folded. Something that looked like paper. Not a phone. Not a tissue. Not a flower. A paper. And that one detail triggered the question that would dominate headlines for the next 48 hours. Was William holding a letter to his mother? People began dissecting the image pixel by pixel. Some enlarged it. Some enhanced it. Some sharpened the outline. They compared it to old photos, notes Diana wrote to friends, letters William once exchanged with her, cards from his childhood. And the more people looked, the more certain they became. The future king was holding a letter. So the theories began. Did he write to his mother before announcing the baby's name? Was he asking for guidance? Was he unloading emotions? Was he sharing something he couldn't say out loud? No one knew the truth. But the palace's silence only fueled the fire. For 12 hours, no statement came. Not a denial. Not a clarification. Not a request for privacy. Nothing. Which only made people more certain. The baby's name was connected to Diana. Meanwhile, inside the palace, chaos. 3 senior aides reportedly panicked when the image went viral. Calls were made at once. Not to the press, but to each other. One insider said, it wasn't the photo that scared them. It was what the photo suggested. Meaning, William's visit wasn't political. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't performative. It was emotional. And emotional decisions are the hardest for the monarchy to control. But William wasn't shaken by the leak. In fact, he was strangely calm. Sources say he reviewed the photo quietly, handed the phone back to the aide, and simply said, "It's all right." Not angry, not embarrassed, not defensive, just calm. Because William knew something everyone else was scrambling to understand. The world was already piecing together the truth. The name was coming. The tribute was clear. The public had guessed the symbolism before the palace could frame it. And once that photo was out, there was no turning back. But one person saw the photo and reacted much differently. Kate. When she saw the image, she reportedly paused, not in shock, but in recognition. She knew that posture. She knew that look. She knew that stillness. Because she had seen William in that emotional space before. The space where the boy who lost his mother surfaces through the man who holds a kingdom. But she also saw something else in the photo. The paper. And insiders say her face softened the moment she noticed it. Because she knew what it was. She knew exactly what William had taken to Althorpe that day. And that detail, that paper, that quiet, private act of a son reaching across time and memory, that is what shaped the final decision about the baby's name. But the world didn't know that yet. All the world saw was an emotional prince, a sacred place, and a silent gesture that spoke volumes. And that's when the pressure turned into panic. Because now the palace couldn't control the narrative. Everyone expected a Diana tribute. Everyone predicted it. Everyone felt it coming. And the family members who were against it, the ones who feared it, resisted it, warned against it, suddenly realized. They had lost the battle. William didn't leak the photo. Kate didn't leak the photo. No staff member leaked the photo. But the universe did. And suddenly, the question changed from, will they name the baby after Diana? To, what else does this name mean? Because the public wasn't satisfied. They sensed layers. They sensed meaning. They sensed a statement behind the name. The baby wasn't born yet, but she was already shaping the monarchy. And then, in a twist no one expected, a second photo emerged. Not from the photographer, not from a staff member. From security footage. A blurred image. Indirect. Unintended. But clearly showing William walking back toward his car. Still holding that paper. That second image confirmed the speculation. This wasn't a passing moment. This wasn't symbolic for the public. It was deeply personal. William had brought something with him. Something he didn't show Kate before leaving. Something he didn't discuss with advisors. Something he didn't read aloud. Something he needed to share with his mother alone. And palace insiders claim that when he returned home that afternoon, he placed the paper on the table next to Kate and said quietly, "I'm ready." And Kate answered, "Then it's time." But what was on that paper? Was it truly a letter? Was it something written long ago? Something Diana wrote to him? Something he wrote to her? Something Kate helped him prepare? Because that paper, whatever it was, changed everything. And the truth of what was written there. We'll come to that in a later chapter. Because before the world could uncover the secret behind that paper, before the baby's name exploded across headlines, before the royal family went into crisis mode, something happened inside the palace that shifted the entire atmosphere. A reaction. A private reaction. A reaction that exposed more truth than any official statement ever could. Because when one senior royal saw the photo, they didn't see a tribute. They saw a threat. And their reaction? It set off a confrontation that nearly postponed the announcement. A confrontation so tense, so emotional. That one advisor said, "That was the moment we realized this name was about to change the royal family forever." What did that senior royal say? And how did William respond? It was late. The kind of late where the palace halls turned silent, where the lights dimmed just enough to remind you that even royalty needs to rest, and where the weight of unspoken thoughts settles heavier than the crown jewels themselves. This was the hour Kate preferred when something mattered, when something pressed on her heart, when something needed to be understood, not by the public, not by the palace, but by her husband. And on this particular night, she wasn't just pacing. She wasn't just thinking. She wasn't just waiting for William to finish a call. She was writing a letter, not typed, not emailed, not drafted on official stationery for public record. Handwritten, private, personal in a way only Kate, the woman who has built her life on balancing duty with humanity, could write. A letter she intended for only one pair of eyes. William's. This letter would become the silent turning point of everything that followed. The baby name, the confrontation, the emotional unraveling within the royal family. The moment William finally said, "I'm ready." But what could Kate possibly have written that shifted William's entire emotional compass? To understand that, we must go back 3 days earlier, when Kate first realized he was holding something back. Something heavy, something old, something unresolved. It wasn't dramatic. William didn't break down. He didn't confess a secret. He didn't withdraw into himself. It was the opposite. It was a quiet heaviness, the kind that lingers in unspoken pauses, the kind that shows in the way someone rubs the back of their neck. The kind that reveals itself in the way someone sighs before answering a simple question. Kate saw all of it. She always does. And she knew it wasn't stress from work. It wasn't the public pressure. It wasn't even the backlash from the senior royal who tried to intervene. It was something deeper. Something about the baby name. Something about Diana. Something he hadn't fully admitted even to himself. Kate had seen it long before the photo leaked. The photo only confirmed what she already sensed. William wasn't struggling with the name itself. He was struggling with whether he had the right to choose it. Because invoking Diana's name, invoking her memory, invoking the most powerful symbol of his childhood, meant reopening emotions he kept carefully locked away. Kate saw it in the way he hesitated before saying her name out loud. In the way he looked at old photos of Diana longer than usual. In the way he held their children a little tighter, a little longer. But William wasn't going to talk about it. Not directly. Not immediately. Not unless something pushed him. That something was the letter. Now, Kate has always understood him in ways the world underestimates. She knows when he needs logic. She knows when he needs space. She knows when he needs humor. And she knows when he needs truth. Soft, honest, and written with intention. This was one of those moments. So she sat down at the small oak desk in their private sitting room, lit only by a single lamp, and began writing. Not with the careful, public tone she uses in official letters. Not with the formal politeness the monarchy requires. But as Kate, the girl who fell in love with a young man still mourning his mother. The woman who built a family around him. The mother who sees the boy inside him that still grieves Diana in ways only a son can understand. She didn't try to fix him. She didn't try to persuade him. She didn't try to guilt him. She wrote to remind him. She reminded him of how Diana lived, heart first. She reminded him of how Diana chose love over protocol. She reminded him of the stories he had told her in quiet moments, bedtime memories, childhood confessions, flashes of joy and fear intertwined. She reminded him that Diana fought for authenticity, that she fought for William's happiness, that she fought for the world to see the monarchy differently, softer, kinder, human. Then Kate wrote something that, according to a palace insider who later saw the letter's contents, changed everything. She gave you the courage to be the man you are today. Let her give our daughter the courage to be the woman she will become. Those words hit William harder than anything said in the many tense conversations with the royal family. Because Kate wasn't invoking Diana as a symbol. She was invoking Diana as a mother. And that distinction mattered. Because William's hesitation wasn't about the monarchy. It wasn't about optics. It wasn't about protocol. It was about fear. Fear of misusing Diana's legacy. Fear of inviting a media storm around a newborn. Fear of triggering old family wounds. Fear of disappointing those who still treat Diana's memory like a fragile museum artifact instead of a living connection. But Kate's letter reminded him that love is not fragile. It is inherited, carried, passed down, protected. And to give their daughter the name Diana wasn't to reopen a wound. It was to honor the woman who made William the father he is. But the letter didn't end there. Kate wrote one more line. A line that would later become the emotional heartbeat of the entire naming decision. You don't owe the world the perfect decision. You owe our daughter the truest one. That sentence changed him. The next day, William seemed lighter. Not happy, not yet, but lighter. As if the emotional fog had lifted just enough for him to see the decision without fear clouding it. And that's when something astonishing happened. William asked to see the list. Not the public one. Not the one prepared for advisors. Not the safe, traditional list approved by protocol. He asked for the original list, the one he and Kate created years ago, scribbled in pencil on a piece of plain white paper. And when he saw the name Diana written there, he didn't hesitate. He just stared at it, letting the name sit between them without speaking. Then he looked at Kate. The look wasn't a question. It wasn't a doubt. It wasn't fear. It was peace. Peace he hadn't felt since his mother died. Peace he didn't expect to feel again. Peace that Kate, through a simple letter, had reminded him he deserved. But peace is dangerous in the royal family. Because the moment William reached that stillness, others sensed it. And that's when trouble arrived. A senior royal, the same one who had objected earlier, made an unannounced visit to Kensington Palace. Not scheduled, not requested, not welcomed. The purpose of the visit was clear. To stop the name, the senior royal. A figure known for strict adherence to tradition, did not sit down, did not wait politely, did not soften their tone. They entered the room and said, "This cannot happen." William didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He didn't lash out. He simply asked, "Why?" And the explanation came, sharp, cold, and wrapped in decades of buried tension. They said the name Diana was too provocative, too emotionally charged, too dangerous for the monarchy's stability. They said it would invite comparisons that could harm the child. They said it would reignite old narratives. They said it would overshadow the present. They said it would stir up the past. But the final line was the one that cut deepest. Diana's name does not belong to one child. It belongs to the institution. William's jaw tightened. Kate's eyes sharpened. The room went painfully still. Because that statement, that Diana belonged to the institution, was the very thing Diana herself spent her life fighting against. Diana never belonged to the institution. She belonged to her sons. And in that moment, the decision was sealed. Not because of rebellion, not because of resentment, not because of defiance, because William realized something with brutal clarity. If he didn't claim his mother's legacy for his daughter, the institution would. And that was the one thing he would never allow. The confrontation escalated briefly. Sharp words exchanged, accusations implied, old wounds scraping open. But William ended it with a sentence that would be repeated in hushed whispers among palace staff for days. "This is my daughter. This is my mother. The decision is mine." The senior royal left in silence. But something remained behind. A shift in the air. A silent acknowledgement that the line had been drawn. Side with William. Or oppose him. But the name was happening. And now, there was no undoing it. As the door closed behind the senior royal, Kate picked up the letter from the table, the same letter she wrote under the glow of a solitary lamp, and handed it to William. "You don't have to keep it," she said, "but I think you should read it once more." He read it. Every word. Slowly. Quietly. When he finished, he folded it carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. And that was the paper he took to Althorpe. That was the paper he held in the leaked photo. Not a letter to his mother. A letter from the woman who helped him honor her. Kate's letter. And when he placed that paper on the table after returning home, he didn't need to say anything else. He looked at Kate and said, "I'm ready." But the palace wasn't ready. Not for what came next. Not for the internal eruption. Not for the emotional reactions. One reaction in particular. A reaction that would stun William, shake Kate, and provoke a warning that would reverberate through the family. A warning from Princess Anne. "It's time to hear it." It was supposed to be a routine meeting. A simple, calm, carefully choreographed discussion inside the palace's smaller conference room. The one used for family matters, internal briefings, and the occasional crisis the monarchy prefers to pretend isn't a crisis. But this meeting? This one was different. Every person present felt it the moment they stepped inside. The air was too still. The tension too sharp. The silence too heavy. Like the quiet before a storm that everyone can sense, but no one dares acknowledge. William arrived first. Not because he wanted to, but because he needed the mental space. He stood by the window, hands behind his back, staring at the courtyard the way someone stares at a battlefield before stepping onto it. Kate came next. She walked in with her characteristic calm, but not the performative calm the world sees at engagements. This was deeper, grounded. The kind of calm that says, "I know exactly where I stand." Then, staff trickled in. A private secretary, a communications advisor, 2 senior aides, a historian brought in for protocol, and finally, 3 senior royals, one of whom had already tried to stop the name. But this time, they weren't alone. This time, they had backup. Now, the palace will never publicly admit which royal faction opposed the decision. They never do. They protect each other even when they disagree violently behind closed doors. But insiders whisper that the divide in this meeting wasn't generational, it was ideological. On one side, William, Kate, Princess, and, though she hadn't arrived yet, a handful of staff who believed in modernization, and advisors who understood public sentiment. On the other side, a senior royal terrified of reignited Diana narratives, a second royal cautious about destabilizing family relations, and a third who simply didn't want the past overshadowing the future. This wasn't a meeting. It was a showdown. And everything, the name, the narrative, the emotional tone of the next decade, was about to be decided. But let's go inside. Let's step into the room with them, because that's where the real story begins. The meeting opened with a terse sentence. We need to discuss the potential consequences of naming the child Diana. William didn't turn around. Not yet. He kept looking out the window, breathing slowly, visibly trying to maintain control. Kate sat down quietly, her hands folded, her expression neutral but determined. Then the objections began, and they didn't come gently. The first senior royal spoke sharply, clearly rehearsed. This decision is emotionally reckless. You risk overshadowing the child with a legacy she cannot possibly carry. Kate's face didn't change. William's shoulders tightened. Another royal leaned forward. Diana's influence was complicated. Do we really want to revive all of that? Especially now? Especially now? Those two words carried weight, because the royal family had been struggling more than the public knew. Internal fractures, succession planning tensions, public image crises, Harry and Meghan conflicts, Andrew's scandals, Charles's health rumors. The monarchy was fragile, and they feared the name Diana would shatter it. A third voice joined, softer, but still resistant. We understand your intentions, truly, but sometimes honoring the past can destabilize the present. This time, William turned around, slowly, and his expression said everything. He had been patient. He had been quiet. He had tolerated the objections. But the implication that honoring his mother was destabilizing snapped something in him. He walked to the table, placed both hands on it, leaned in slightly, and said, "She destabilized nothing. She illuminated truth. There's a difference." Silence. The kind of silence that slices through a room like a thin blade. Kate watched him, not with fear, not with worry, with pride, because this wasn't anger. This was clarity. But the senior royal, the one who had objected most strongly since the very beginning, wasn't finished. They said, "We're not questioning her worth. We're questioning the timing." Kate raised her chin slightly. Why is the timing a problem? Her voice was calm, measured, firm. The senior royal paused too long. Far too long. And that hesitation revealed more than their eventual answer. Because the family is already under pressure. The public is scrutinizing everything. Adding Diana to the narrative will only. Kate cut in gently but decisively. Bring the public back to us. That landed hard. Because she was right, and everyone in the room knew it. The monarchy's strength had always depended on connection, genuine connection, something Diana embodied more naturally than anyone before or after. Kate continued. The public trusts Diana. They loved her. They still love her. Honoring her isn't instability. It's humanity. A small gasp. Someone scribbling notes. Someone's pen tapping nervously. But the senior royal, the one most fearful, made the mistake of saying something that crossed a line none of them had anticipated. They said, "We cannot allow Diana's memory to dictate the future of the monarchy." William stood straighter. Kate's jaw tightened. "You misunderstand," William said. "Diana isn't dictating anything. I am." Then he added, voice steady, eyes unwavering. "And the future of the monarchy is mine to carry." You could feel the air change. Because this was not a prince speaking. This was a king in waiting. A man stepping fully into his authority. But the pushback grew sharper. One of the royals leaned forward and said, "And what of the other children? How will they feel being compared to the one who bears the name of a legend?" Kate responded quickly. "They will feel proud. Because they love their grandmother too. Even the ones who never met her." It was a powerful moment. Not just because of what she said, but because of who she said it about. Charlotte, George, Louis, their children, their family, their legacy. But the senior royal countered. "That sentiment, Catherine. This requires logic." For the first time all meeting, Kate's tone changed. Not harsh, not emotional, but elevated. The subtle shift she uses when someone forgets she is not just a royal spouse, but the future queen. She said, "Sentiment is what the public remembers. Sentiment is what the monarchy has lacked. And sentiment is why this name matters." No one expected her to say that. William's eyes softened as he watched her. He knew she rarely entered conflict like this unless someone had crossed a personal line. And they had. Because this wasn't just a baby name. This was William's mother. And Kate was defending both of them. The tension climbed again when one advisor nervously introduced a document. Lists of alternative names, all traditional, all safe. all painfully forgettable. Names that carried no emotion. Names no one would remember. Names that could belong to any royal child from any generation. Names like Victoria, Cecilia, Mary, Helena, Alexandra. Beautiful, yes, but hollow in comparison, the advisor said. These options would cause no controversy. William replied without hesitation. They would cause no meaning. And then the argument hit its peak. The senior royal, the one whose voice had started shaking with urgency, spoke the words that shifted the entire meeting. If you choose this name, you are choosing the past over the present. William stepped forward, eyes sharp. No, I am choosing truth over fear. Another heavy silence.